Somewhere under Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming, there's a layer of rock that holds more oil than any other formation on the planet. Estimates for how much of it could ever be pulled out range from a little over 1 trillion barrels up to more than 4 trillion, and the number most commonly quoted sits around 3 trillion. For comparison, that's more than double everything humanity has burned through since the very first commercial oil well went into the ground back in the 1850s. And in more than a century of trying, hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, and some of the best engineering minds in the industry working on the problem, the United States has never pulled a single commercial barrel out of it. This is the Green River Formation, and it might be the strangest resource in American energy. Not because it isn't there. Everyone agrees it's there. It's exactly where the maps say it is. The strange part is that it has beaten every serious attempt to get it out for over 100 years straight. Almost all of it sits on federal land, managed by the same government agencies that keep quietly renewing leases to companies willing to try again. 50 million years ago, before Utah was Utah, this region was covered by an enormous freshwater lake, fed by rivers pouring in sediment for millions of years. Algae bloomed and died in its shallows. Organic material settled to the bottom, layer after layer, and got buried deeper as more sediment piled on top of it. Heat and pressure built up over time, and that buried organic matter slowly began converting into hydrocarbons, the same basic process that creates oil almost everywhere on Earth. Except here, the process never finished. In a normal oil field, that organic material got buried deep enough and stayed hot enough for long enough to fully convert into liquid crude, something you can simply pump out of the ground. Underneath these three states, the burial wasn't quite deep enough and the heat wasn't quite high enough. What formed instead was kerogen, a waxy, solid precursor to oil that's chemically locked into the rock itself rather than pooled in a reservoir somewhere beneath it. The rock isn't sitting on top of the oil. In a very real sense, the rock is the oil, just not finished yet. A geologist can drill a core sample here, hold it in one hand, and be holding both the rock and the fuel at the same time. Nature simply ran out of time before it finished the job. That distinction is the whole story. Kerogen doesn't flow. You can't drill a well into it and wait for crude to rise up the pipe the way you would almost anywhere else in the world. To get anything usable out of it, you have to heat the rock itself to well over 600 degrees Fahrenheit and hold it there long enough to finish a chemical reaction that nature left incomplete. There are two ways to try that. You can mine the rock, crush it, and cook it in giant vessels on the surface, which works. But it also leaves you with more waste rock than you started with, since the material expands when it's processed. Or you can try to heat the rock underground in place without ever mining it at all. That second option is what a major oil company spent decades trying to perfect in western Colorado. Its first small test ran on a plot of land smaller than a tennis court, out on the western slope in the late 1990s. The results were promising enough that the company kept going for another decade, scaling the idea up piece by piece. Engineers drilled wells to lower heating elements directly into the rock, letting them slowly bring the surrounding formation up to the right temperature over several years. It worked, in the sense that kerogen really did convert into oil and gas underground. The problem turned out to be everything sitting around it. This part of the Green River Formation sits above and inside aquifers that supply drinking water to an already water-stressed region. Heat rock to over 600 degrees for years at a time, and the groundwater around it doesn't stay put. It moves toward the heat, which risks contaminating the surrounding aquifer and carrying heated water into places it was never supposed to reach. The company's answer was something almost nobody outside the oil industry has ever heard of: a freeze wall. A ring of wells drilled around the entire heating zone, filled with refrigerant, chilled to dozens of degrees below zero, creating a wall of frozen rock meant to seal the hot zone off from the surrounding aquifer completely. On paper, it worked. At the scale needed to produce oil commercially, the cost of building and maintaining that frozen barrier kept climbing until it made the whole project impossible to justify. By 2013, the company had walked away entirely after decades and hundreds of millions of dollars spent trying to make it work. It wasn't the first company to learn that lesson, and it wouldn't be the last. The most infamous collapse happened on a Sunday. In the 1970s, the oil embargo convinced Washington and the American oil industry that this rock was the answer to foreign oil dependence. Billions of dollars poured into western Colorado. The towns of Rifle, Meeker, and Parachute grew almost overnight to house the workers arriving for what everyone assumed would become a permanent new industry. A consortium including one of the largest oil companies in the world built a massive processing operation near Parachute designed to produce tens of thousands of barrels a day from surface-mined shale. Then, on May 2, 1982, the company shut the entire project down, effective immediately. Not scaled back, shut down. More than 2,000 workers lost their jobs before the end of that single day. Global oil prices had fallen far enough that shale oil, always more expensive to produce than ordinary crude, simply couldn't compete anymore, even with the government support built specifically to protect it. Locals still call it Black Sunday. Rifle's population collapsed in the following year. Real estate values crashed, and businesses that had opened just months earlier to serve an incoming workforce closed almost as fast as they had appeared. Schools that had been expanding to handle a wave of new students spent the next several years cutting staff instead. Subscribe if you want more of these deep dives. The core problem hasn't changed since. Conventional oil production typically returns dozens of units of energy for every 1 unit spent extracting it, which is exactly what made cheap oil possible in the first place. Heating solid rock to hundreds of degrees for years at a time, whether on the surface or underground, is a completely different equation. Depending on the method, oil shale returns somewhere between 1.5 and 4 units of energy for every unit put in. At the low end of that range, you're barely breaking even before you've sold a single barrel. That doesn't make the resource worthless, it makes it expensive. And an expensive source of oil only makes sense when the price of ordinary crude is high enough to make the math work, which it rarely stays for long. This formation doesn't know or care what oil is trading at on any given day. It just sits there, holding trillions of barrels that are always one price swing away from being either the most valuable deposit on the continent or simply too costly to bother with. The water problem hasn't gone away either. This formation sits inside the drainage basin of a river system that already supplies tens of millions of people across 7 states and part of Mexico, and that has been running below its historical average for years. Any large-scale development here would need enormous amounts of water in a river system that's already stretched thin. In recent years, federal policy has shifted to encourage more drilling on public land across the American West, opening up new leases and speeding up approvals across the region. Companies have shown renewed interest in shallower, more conventional sections of this same formation, using modern horizontal drilling rather than the old heat-the-rock approach that failed here for decades. But that's a different kind of oil, sitting in different rock, using techniques that have nothing to do with the trillions of barrels of kerogen still locked in the deeper shale below it. The kerogen hasn't moved. The physics hasn't changed. There is still no commercial oil shale operation anywhere in the United States. There has never been one. Every company that has seriously tried has either walked away or scaled back to research long before reaching commercial scale. Not because nobody wanted it badly enough. Some of the biggest, best-funded energy companies on Earth wanted it badly enough and still couldn't make it work. The oil has been sitting there for 50 million years, and it will keep sitting there for 50 million more if nobody ever solves the problem that's beaten every attempt so far. It isn't hidden. It isn't a secret. It's mapped, measured, and sitting exactly where the surveys say it is, in plain view of every geologist who has ever looked. What it isn't so far is reachable. The only question that's ever mattered here isn't whether it exists. It's whether it will ever be real in the way that actually counts, cheap enough and simple enough to finally pull out of the ground, rather than remaining the largest fortune in America that no one has ever managed to spend.